A lot of times, sometimes it's good to study in groups, right? You can do your own brainstorming sessions, right? Okay, so we're going to be talking about spinal tracts. Now, what do you think would be the two main divisions of types of tracts that you're going to have? Yeah, sensory and motor. Okay, so which way is sensory tracts going to go? Up. Up. What's another way, a fancier way to say that? Ascending or afferent. And then descending is going to be efferent. Yeah, we always remember as efferent is E for exit, so it's going out. Going down is efferent. And how many neurons do you have in descending tracts usually?
Two.
Yeah. How many in sensory? So somebody was mentioning that some of these, when you print the notes out, that you can't always read all the stuff on here. You may need, if you can't read it, I mean, when you print it out there, if you print it too big, you're going to use too much paper and take up too many notes. And even when you print it on a full page, sometimes you can't always read that. So these graphics that are in here, sometimes it's just to get a picture of it. So you may still need to have another text or look something up somewhere and you may need to find a way to label these things. And some of these you don't necessarily need to label, but this is just basic understanding about the spinal cord and the structure of it. So the spinal cord is going to start at the foramen magnum. So basically it's where it exits the cranium. And then you have different terms that we use to describe the bundles of nerves that are in the spinal cord. Sometimes we call them tracts, or fasciculus, or peduncles, or lemniscus. And we'll go through those, but mostly what we're going to be talking about is tracts. Okay, peduncles a lot of times is where, like the cerebellum, there's cerebellar peduncles. We talked about that last time. You have the superior, the middle, and the inferior, things like that. And then fasciculus, we'll be talking about some tracts in the spinal cord that are called fasciculus, like fasciculus cuneatus and gracilis. And then also lemniscus. So when you're outside of in the central nervous system, you're going to have the two main things, which is what? Brain and spinal cord. Okay, so when you have the spinal cord, what's the very first part that comes off of the spinal cord when you're talking about nerves? What do you call that? The nerve root, right? Like C1, C2, C3, so on and so forth. Then you can start getting into different things where you have the different flexi, and you have trunks and branches and divisions and things like that. And then eventually when you get farther down out into the extremities, then what do you have? Well, as opposed to central nerves, but now you call them peripheral nerves. Okay? So then they're usually going to have a name. So nerve roots have numbers, peripheral nerves have names. We'll talk about median nerve, sciatic nerve, things like that. So at this point, we're going to be talking primarily about the central nervous system, so we're going to talk about spinal tracts. Because once you talk about nerve roots, are nerve roots sensory or motor? Or both? Both. But I mean, technically, when you're coming off the spinal cord, we'll talk about you're going to have a sensory root and a ventral and dorsal. So they come directly out of the spinal cord, separated between sensory and motor, but then they come together and you have a single nerve root that's going to go. So we'll talk about that. I mean, basically, this is going to be the back part of the spine, or the dorsal. These are going to be sensory coming in. Like here's a nerve root, and then this is the dorsal root and the ventral root. This is typically going to be motor, and this is typically going to be sensory. So So why do we say that the spinal cord ends at L2? I thought there was L5. Right. So the actual spinal cord itself ends, but you still have all those different nerve roots. You still have L3, 4, 5, S1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and single coccyx root. But at that point, it's the cauda-equina where it's actually just nerve root fibers. Looks like that went behind the picture. So it should say behind there that it's there. Once it goes outside of the CNS, and when you get past the nerve roots, then it's a peripheral nerve, and then it has a particular name. Okay, whether it'll be the median nerve, or ulnar nerve, or musculocutaneous nerve, or lateral femoral cutaneous, things like that. And then how many cranial nerves are there? I mean, I'm sorry, how many cervical?
1,
7,
8,
8.
7 or 8?
8, 7 vertebrae, 8 nerves.
Right. Okay. So in the cervical spine, they start out coming out, the named nerve root comes out above the cervical vertebra. So C1 nerve root comes out above C1. Then when you get to the end and you have C7, C8 comes out below C7. And then from that point down, the nerve roots exit below the vertebra that corresponds to it. Okay, so then we mentioned before, there's 12 cranial nerves, and then there's 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And so then, like we mentioned, there's 8 pairs in the cervical spine, 12 in the thoracic, 5 in the lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. So when you're talking about the brain, in the nervous system, you have 2 kinds of matter. What do they call that? Gray matter and white matter. So when you're talking about the cranium, what's on the outside and what's on the inside?
Outside is gray.
Okay? And inside is white. And which ones are the nerve cell bodies and which ones are the insulated nerve? Say that again?
The white is insulated.
Yeah. Okay. So gray matter is the cell body. So in the cranium, in the cranium, the cell bodies are on the outside, and then the white's on the inside. And then what is it on the spinal cord? It's the other way around. So you're going to have the gray matter here, and then the white matter around the outside. And so then you're going to have the ventral horn and the dorsal. Actually, in the gray matter, you have the ventral horn and the dorsal horn. And then you're going to have, this is going to be the root back here, so this would be what would you call this root back here, dorsal or ventral? Dorsal, and then ventral root. And then this here is the common spinal root. So at this point, it's going to be what, sensory or motor? Sensory. This is going to be motor, but then together, when you have this, you're going to have mixed sensory and motor. So like we said, the inner part is going to be the gray matter, the outer part is going to be the white matter. And then the gray matter is where you're going to have the cell bodies, and then that's where you're also going to have the synapses. So this dorsal horn here is only going to be sensory, and then the ventral is only going to be motor.